Welcome to this talk, which is called Demystifying the Dark Web. And that's exactly what we're going to do over the course of the next 50 minutes or so. So this is literally what are some of the major conceptions or interpretations and perceptions about the dark web, and how many of them are accurate and realistic. So we'll be literally popping the lid off the top of the dark web and evaluating whether it is indeed the capital of cybercrime, whether it is indeed represented accurately within the media, where there's very much a moral panic around the dark web, or whether there's slightly more to the story. So over the course of the next 50 minutes, we're going to be looking at different angles and aspects of the dark web, and I'm hoping to make this session quite interactive. So if I'm going too quickly, or if there's something that I mentioned that you'd like me to backtrack over, something you'd like more information about, then Lauren, please let me know if any questions come up in the chat. And I do have some questions, some nice opening, ice-breaking questions, trying to get a sense of what your thoughts are around the dark web. So hopefully you find this really interesting, really exciting, and you can all see the slides that I'm sharing. And away we go, on with the show. So first things first, Lauren's already done a really lovely job of telling you a little bit about me. So I'm a senior lecturer and course leader for some of our major criminology and policing degrees within the department. And I'm also the lead developer of our cybercrime and policing modules as well. So within that content, we look at lots of different types of cybercrime, from revenge porn, cyber harassment, cyber terrorism, trafficking online, and how those crimes are policed. So I'm very much embedded in the world of cybercrime, and I've got lots of links with investigators across the Eastern region as well. And as Lauren mentioned, my research area has been based in looking at essentially dark web networks in the past, answering the big question, which is the dark web used predominantly for nefarious, negative, harmful, damaging activities, cybercrimes, or is there a side to the dark web that doesn't quite get the same level of press and attention? So I'll be presenting some findings around that today and asking you for your interpretation as well. So part of what I do is I work as a cyber special for Essex Police, which is basically in any context where there is a live investigation going on, where my specialism can be of value, can be of use to those investigations, they essentially let me know, and I feed into supporting those investigations, which is a really nice way for me to stay up to date and current on some of the emergent threats and trends that are going on at the moment. So if anyone's interested to have more information from me, whether it be related to the courses or the presentation, then you can, of course, email me on christian.kemp@aru.ac.uk for more information. Okay, so let's start off with a nice wide lens. And what I want to do is essentially give you a nice crisp definition of what the dark web actually is. Some of you will have an idea, some of you will have an impression, some of you may even have ventured to the dark web, so you'll be more versed than others. But for the sake of being thorough, I'd like to give you a nice overview of what the dark web is and what makes it different from the internet that we all traditionally access on a day-to-day. Okay? Now, once I've done that, and I want you to be having a think about this while I'm talking, I'd like you to basically think of what the first words are that come to mind when you think about what the dark web actually is. So a little bit of what they call in psychology free association. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? What word, adjective, or noun best describes it in your mind? So if you're in a classroom, for example, in a moment, I'll ask you to turn to the person sitting next to you and relay some of those words back to me, so I can have a look in the chat and we can get a sense of how you perceive this hidden digital space. So what is it though? What is the dark web? I think we can accept that the dark web is separate to the surface web. So there are a lot of words that are thrown around, and you'll hear terms like deep web, dark web, darknet, surface web, the terrestrial internet. Basically, the difference between the dark web and the surface web that we all access on a day-to-day basis is the fact that the dark web is like an enclave or a pocket or a bubble that exists within the internet but is its own separate network. So it's will not appear, websites related to the dark web will not appear in search results when you type in, you know, cat food or shoes into Google, for example. The dark web is part of its own self-contained network. Now, what's interesting about that is that you can't actually access it without downloading a special browser. So when you, for example, want to access Amazon.com or Facebook, you will use Windows Explorer, you'll use Chrome, you'll use Firefox. All of these are web explorers that allow you to access websites that are indexed. So in other words, they have a certificate and they are available for indexing and cataloging by the search engines that you use, whether that be Google, DuckDuckGo, etc. That's a way of essentially organizing all of these web pages. So that's the surface web. The dark web requires its own special web browser, which allows you to access the network that the dark web exists within. Now, that browser is known as Tor, and Tor, T-O-R, is a shorthand way of saying the onion router. So that's its full name for the network that underpins the dark web. It's known as the onion router. Why are we talking about onions? Because essentially, in the minds of developers and computer programmers, the internet is layered. There are different levels to the internet, just like an onion. So if you think about the dark web within the grander structure of the internet, it is almost like a tiny little bubble that's cut out within its own level and substrata that can only be accessed via this special web browser. Why is it special? It's special because essentially it speaks the same language as the dark web network and can hook you into it. It is also special for a series of other reasons that make it very attractive to organized crime. So without any spoilers, because I'm going to talk you through some of these things, it also enables those that access the dark web to inherit two very powerful tools on the internet. One of which is encryption, which basically means that the requests for information or your traffic from one dark web website where you're clicking on different sites is not visible to outside parties. And the second one is anonymity, where your identity and your location within the world are hidden. So to sum up, the dark web within itself is a subsection, sub-network within the normal internet that sits below, beneath, beside, however you want to mentally imagine it, to the surface web that we can all access on a day-to-day basis. Okay, I'll talk to you about that in a bit more depth later on, but what I'm really interested to know is what is the first thing that comes to mind when you think about the dark web, based on the media, based on films that you might have watched about the dark web, based on conversations that you've had with your friends, or even based on the little bit of digital tourism that you might have undertaken as part of your own trips and journeys into this strange, weird and wonderful hidden digital space. So let's take a minute or two for you to turn around to the person sitting next to you, ask the question, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think about the dark web? And when you come up with a good word, type it into the chat box for me so that I can springboard off the back of what you say and we can have a little bit of a discussion about what that perception is, okay? If you're on your own at home, absolutely fine, no problem. Type those in. And one thing that's really important to state is all answers are good answers. All perceptions and interpretations are good. You know, there are no wrong answers in this exercise. It is what it is to you, okay? So fire those into the chat box, which I'm now going to flick over to.
We do have a few in there, Christian, already.
Amazing.
We've got Adele's class have put drugs, black market, dark figure of crime, red rooms. Callie's class have put drugs, black market, criminals. Beth has put access to illegal products or services. Adele has put sex trafficking. And I have put
Amazing.
dodgy.
Amazing, thank you. So what are we getting here? Well, we're getting here almost as a wall of descriptors. We are getting a very, very strong and powerful sense of the dark web as being enshrouded in criminality, right? So we're talking here drugs, black market activity, hidden elements of crime, red rooms, which is an urban myth and a legend associated with the dark web, you know, live types of victimization and abuse occurring in this hidden digital spaces. So we've got, again, criminality and access to illegal products and services. And again, from Adele's class as well, we even have sex trafficking thrown into the mix. You know, notice not a single one of those mentions anything positive, right? Overwhelmingly negative and overwhelmingly representing this as something harmful, dangerous, and something to be very concerned about, something to be very worried about, okay? So, fabulous, thank you for those responses. The next thing that I want to ask you is, have you ever accessed the dark web? And if you have, then why? And all answers are correct answers, don't worry, you know. And if not, why not? Or if you haven't, why wouldn't you? Okay, so it could simply be, for those of you who are in a classroom, what might be useful is if you have like a column of yes, and then you can give me a number of how many have said yes, and then maybe a column that says no, and then how many have said no. And some of the reasons for why that might be the case as well would be really interesting to read. Okay, so I'll give you a minute just to confer with each other, have a think. Josh says yes, and out of curiosity. Classic. You know, who should seek to exclude you from a part of the internet that you may very well be curious about and would want to explore? Kelly says yes, and that's 4. No, 13. Adele says out of the classroom, yes, 0. No. Beth says, I haven't used it intentionally, but I think I may have come across it. Adele says, some have, but with other people, but not actively themselves. Yes. There was a time, I think there's a time in the sort of the, as you're going through different rites of passage, that as a group of friends, you're like, you know, wouldn't it be a fun thing to do for us to venture into the dark web together and see what's what? So a lot of the students that I teach will say exactly the same thing, is that yes, I've been to the dark web, but I accessed it on someone else's computer. So I went there with somebody else. But what's fascinating is just to stop for a second and look at these ratios. So we may see 3 or 4 who have ventured into the dark web, but then the overwhelming majority have not, or definitely not ventured there themselves personally. Now, if I go back a year or two, that proportion would have been even more in favour of, you know, the majority never venturing anywhere near the dark web, where it would be very rare. There'd be 1 or 2 people. Now, what I find personally really interesting is that you guys on the call at the moment, in the classrooms, wherever you may be, you are what we refer to within criminology and studies of cybercrime, digital natives, which means that more than many other generations, you have been raised surrounded by technology and surrounded by technology that connects to the internet, internet-based platforms, different types of social media, what we refer to as the Internet of Things, which are all the household goods that connect to your Wi-Fi and to broader networks. Yet, with how comfortable and immersed and familiar you are with the internet, the dark web still remains this place that is a bridge too far, a place that I don't want to go to because it's risky, it's dangerous, it's harmful. Even in the context of curiosity, you may venture there once, never again after that, which I find fascinating. And a lot of what my work is trying to understand why that is. So what is it about what you've consumed in the media or your understandings about what the dark web are that make this place somewhere that you won't travel to? So I'm going to flick back to my slides now, and thank you very much for your input there. Now let's break this down a little bit. So before we get into some of the myths around the dark web, I want to grapple with the moral panic that has made many of you not go near the dark web. And I think there's almost like an implicit assumption that when we talk about things that are dark, the dark web, the deep web, we're talking about a hidden, shadowy reality, something that is considered to be inherently dangerous and something which comes with a moral judgment. So many people that I'll speak to, I'll say, well, have you ever been to the dark web? Have you ever used it? And they'll say, why would I? I'm not a criminal. You know, I have no reason to use something that is designed for criminality, which the dark web was never designed for criminality. It was appropriated by cyber criminals later on because of a set of benefits that it offered them. But for those of you who don't know, the dark web was actually originally created by the US military. And it was created by the US military as a means of facilitating encrypted, safe, hidden communication along a global network. So spies, foreign states could not access messages about military positions or military intelligence that were being sent around the world. So obviously it's an important function. It is only later on that we have seen the moral panic bubble and grow around the dark web, where I would say, and you are free to disagree with me here, but I would say a good 90% of the news articles that we read about the dark web are salacious, they're sensational, and they tend to dramatize the negative elements and aspects, which, fair enough, do exist within the dark web. So by focusing on those, we forget other things. So to give you an insight into what some of this, the moral panic and the fear around the moral panic has been in the media. This is a quote that I like using in the courses that I teach, because why? On the one hand, it's recent, so it's not that old, 2018, and the second, it's quite extensive and detailed. So let me just take a moment to read this to you, for those of you in the classrooms. The dark web, as described by the Irish Times in October 2018. So, a regular murder can be arranged for $45,000, while making a victim disappear without a trace costs $60,000. A straightforward crippling is $12,000, but if the aim is to uglify a person or have acid thrown in their face, the price rises to $18,000. A beating costs $3,000, as explained by cybersecurity expert Paul Dwyer. So, millions of images of children being abused constantly change hands in this murky marketplace, and websites aimed at encouraging vulnerable teenage girls to starve themselves before committing suicide are easy to find. Dwyer veers away from the most distressing content and describes the dark web as the petri dish of hate and evil. In no uncertain terms, could we be more graphic in terms of representing the potential harm? As a cyber criminologist, this quote single-handedly hits about 5 major crime categories in a single paragraph. It looks at violence against women and girls. It looks at issues related to suicide, drug abuse, the black market aspect of the dark web as well. And were you to consume nothing other than quotes like this, is it any wonder that you would never, ever go near the dark web? But of course, what we tend to do when we study criminology is we're not skeptical, but we're critical. We critique media representations of different things. And I think in this case, if we critique this, we could probably say, well, who is publishing this and why are they publishing it in the form that they are? Firstly, this sells, it's newsworthy, it's salacious, it's exciting, it's interesting. We are riding a wave of increased interest in true crime, so this sells papers. And then on the other hand, it's also being reported and recorded here by a cybersecurity expert whose interests rest in selling cybersecurity packages or representing harm online as being quite profound. So there's a series of different agendas coming together here to present this quote in a very, very strong, powerful, intense fashion. Now, my experience of using the dark web over the course of probably the best part of the last 10 years or so, I would say that this is very much an over-dramatization. To find any of these services, you'd have to really seek them out, and I'll talk you through the reality of what's being mentioned in here now and over in the next couple of slides. So let's talk about the realities first. There is some truth to the moral panic. As always, often moral panics are based in half-truths. So it is true to say that in certain crime types and categories, the dark web is indeed a haven for that type of criminality. Hacking being a really, really good example. There are forums on the dark web where experienced and high-skilled hackers share, purchase, sell very, very dangerous pieces of code. And they do that between themselves. So that is true. And I would signpost you, if any of you are interested to learn more about that, Darkcode was a forum on the dark web where you could go and learn, find resources as to how to make malicious pieces of software. Think of it as the hacking equivalent of the anarchist's cookbook, right? Terrorism, yes. There is truth to the argument that the dark web offers those intent on doing harm and planning activities certain benefits, like hidden communications, like the ability to find propaganda, guidebooks, and hidden communications around terror events in the past. The teaching of orthodox clerics and preachers can, yes, indeed, be found on the dark web. Human trafficking. So one of the comments made in the chat box earlier on was of sex trafficking, modern slavery. Now, personally, I've investigated this because this keeps coming up. And students always say, isn't it something that is used for human trafficking? My experience from what I've found, no, it's not. There is no evidence, tangible evidence, to suggest that victims of human trafficking are bought and sold on the dark web. And there's a very simple reason for that. Human traffickers are most interested in making money. That's the whole reason behind why they're exploiting victims. If you host information about a victim on the dark web and you advertise the sale of that victim, you are doing so to a very niche and very small market. So it contradicts the business model. There is very little money to be made by advertising on the dark web, which still, even today, is a place that doesn't get that much traffic. So when we do see human trafficking overlap with the internet, it's actually advertised on the surface web and the ordinary internet, not on the dark web. Somebody else in the chat also mentioned red rooms, a particularly horrible and nasty urban myth and legend around the live violence, essentially, that is live streamed and broadcast over the dark web. No reality to that. The dark web does not have the capacity to actually host and stream content like that effectively. And I have found indications that say that many of the websites that advertise that they are red rooms are in fact scam sites. They'll charge you a price of admission to get into a website, but in actual fact what they're doing is that it's a dead site behind a paywall, right? It's not real. What is true and what is accurate are the next two categories, however, and they are crypto markets and dark web networks, and markets designed to sell contraband like drugs, arms, carding, hacking equipment, for example. That's true, and there are routinely investigations and operations to take back these huge marketplaces that exist. And then finally, as well, it is true to say that the dark web has become a hub for child abuse imagery and its purchase, sale, and distribution within networks. Now, why would that be the case? Okay, why would the dark web act as such a powerful and attractive sanctuary for these types of crimes? So if you look at this little animation that I've got going on the slide that's just loading up here, I'm not going to go into these in detail now. This is something that I teach as part of my course on cybercrime. But if you look at each of these components surrounding this midpoint where it says cybercriminal, each of these elements, so Tails, Tor, Bitcoin, VPNs, and PGP encryption, are all an essential part of the very fabric that underpins the dark web. And as I mentioned at the start of this presentation, they are all things which give cyber criminals two very important tools in their arsenal to evade and avoid law enforcement. One of which is encryption, so communicating in an encrypted fashion where no one can intercept those messages and decipher what you're saying. And the other one is anonymity. So these are things that you do not have when you use the surface web. When you access Amazon.com, the request for information that you send to Amazon is observable by outside parties. If you have cookies enabled, your traffic and movement around the internet is actually tabulated. It's gathered together and it's put into a little bundle that are then sold on to advertisers who target you based on what you look at, how often you look at things, what you purchase over a given period of time, because you're a consumer. That doesn't happen on the dark web because of the way that the network functions. You are hidden. Your identity is shielded by these technologies. And the effect is, for cyber criminals, that it creates an almost impenetrable fortress around the cyber criminals, or so they think, or so they believe. Now, it's not 99% impenetrable. The police are coming a hell of a long way towards being able to break several of these tools in this digital fortress that cyber criminals believe protects them, but they are still very powerful tools. Now, if we think about the benefits that are afforded to cyber criminals, what I want to really make the point of here is that these are all tools that were originally invented for a very different purpose. The dark web wasn't created for cyber criminals. It has been adopted by cyber criminals. It was originally developed for the reasons that you see here in these 4 points. So because encryption and anonymity are central to the dark web, it's used for whistleblowing, which essentially means if you live or work within a company that's exploitative and you want to whistleblow and tell the world about what's going on, the dark web and the way that it's encrypted and gives you anonymity allows you to do that safely in a way that makes you comfortable and confident that you won't face repercussions. You know, if you work for the government, for example, and you see videos depicting abuse or foreign engagements that aren't ethical, how do you get that out into the world that you may believe the world quite rightly needs to see in a way that protects you? And the dark web is central and instrumental to that because it allows you to do that in a way that hides your person, your personal identity. Now, a second really important beneficial use of the dark web is to circumvent or navigate around censorship. So there are some countries in the world where it's illegal to access certain religious texts. It's illegal to access certain social media pages. It's illegal to access certain news outlets that aren't run by the government or aren't run by the state. What do you do in a context like that where you want to know what's going on in the outside world, outside of the authoritarian regime that you live in? The dark web allows you to do that because via the dark web and via Tor, you can access the world outside this iron wall that's preventing you from accessing that content. China is a good example of this. So it allows you to communicate with that outside world as well. So you're not just consuming media and understanding what's going on outside, but you can communicate with that world, again, in an encrypted and protected fashion. Now, I mentioned to you before, when you surf the surface web, a lot of your data is hoovered up and gathered. And there is a growing movement amongst people who are fed up of that. They're tired of their data being gathered, and they're tired of not having consent over how their data is used, feeling like they're surveyed by the corporate world, that they're surveyed by governments and countries for a range of reasons that they believe are unethical. So again, to circumvent around that and to avoid that, more and more people are now using the dark web as an alternative way of surfing the web. So to hopefully represent the alternative side of the dark web, I'm going to show you a very quick clip. So I think it's a couple of minutes or so. And it was actually made and it was actually produced by the company that is behind the Tor network. So they are known as the Tor project. They are the ones that manage the dark web and that run it. And this is a little bit of a promotional video where they're trying to combat this moral panic, and they're trying to say, look, it's not about cybercrime. It's not all about child abuse imagery, terrorism, trafficking, red rooms. The Tor network that underpins the dark web is more than that. And this is, from their perspective, what it is and why it exists.
We've gotten very used to the internet. We're constantly sharing information about ourselves and our private lives. Food we eat, people we meet, places we go, and the stuff we read. Let me explain it better. Right at this moment, if someone attempts to look you up, they will see your real identity, precise location, operating system, all the sites you have visited, the browser you used to surf the web, and so much more information about you and your life, which you probably didn't mean to share with unknown strangers who could easily use this data to exploit you. But not if you're using Tor. Tor browser protects our privacy and identity on the internet. Tor secures your connection with 3 layers of encryption and passes it through 3 voluntarily operated servers around the world, which enables us to communicate anonymously over the internet. Tor also protects our data against corporate or government-targeted and mass surveillance. Perhaps you live in a repressive country which tries to control and surveil the internet. Or perhaps you don't want big corporations taking advantage of your personal information. Tor makes all of its users to look the same, which confuses the observer and makes you anonymous. So the more people use the Tor network, the stronger it gets, as it's easier to hide in a crowd of people who look exactly the same. You can bypass the censorship without being worried about the censor knowing what you do on the internet. The ads won't follow you everywhere for months, starting when you first clicked on a product. By using Tor, the sites you visit won't even know who you are and from what part of the world you're visiting them, unless you log in and tell them so. By downloading and using Tor, you can also protect the people who need anonymity, like activists, journalists, and bloggers. So download and use Tor, or run a relay.
So I really like that video because it represents almost all of the positives that I described in the previous slide. And there are often things that don't make their way into the press. They aren't part of the normal narrative that we're used to hearing about the dark web. And it's interesting that those are things that are being driven by the creators, the developers, and the managers of the dark web network itself. You know, they're almost feeling a responsibility to advocate on behalf of the positive sides of the dark web and how it functions, who it benefits, you know. So what's interesting is the Tor browser, so the actual browser that you would use to access the dark web, isn't something that you would only use for the dark web. You can use it to also surf the surface web and do so in an encrypted, anonymous way that protects you from the things mentioned in that video. So as we now glide towards the sort of the latter third of the presentation, what I want to do is a little bit of a demystification or demystifying activity, where I want to talk you through what are probably like the major myths that I've heard over the course of teaching cybercrime, specifically the dark web, over the last few years. And these are the things that when I ask the students to tell me, you know, what do you think the dark web is? How do you think it exists? These are the most common and classic things that I tend to hear. So the first one, downloading Tor is illegal. The second, accessing the dark web is illegal. The third is that if you do access the dark web, that you'll somehow end up on a surveillance list where the government will then be tracking and tracing and watching your online activity. That the dark web is dedicated predominantly to illegal, illicit, nefarious content and information. So therefore, why would I venture to the dark web? I have no reason to do so. On that basis, if the dark web is exclusively nefarious, only cyber criminals or criminals of whatever description use it. Because of encryption, because of anonymity associated with the infrastructure and technology associated with the dark web, it is unpoliced. You know, it is outside of law enforcement control. If you venture near it, something horrible and nasty is going to happen to your machine. So you will yourself be the victim of a cyber attack or potentially see your data and information hacked if you venture near the dark web. The overall dynamic proportion of the dark web is perceived to be really big, huge, in fact. You know, we see it as this huge dark figure, this huge black hole within the internet that we can't understand, comprehend, or fully grapple with in terms of its size. And finally, it is really difficult to actually access it, and that you need some sort of computer programming skill, computer sciences knowledge and understanding in order to access it. So the question that I want to ask you as a group, so to the classroom, turn around to each other and ask this question, or if you're at home, have a think on this and answer in the chat. How many of these perceptions of the dark web do you think are true? How many of them do you think are accurate? And how many of them do you think are false? So which ones do you think are realistic and which ones do you think are not? So I'm going to give you a minute to confer with each other, and then I'm going to cast my eye over to the chat. How many of them do you think are true? And how many of them do you think are false? What do we think? So Nathaniel thinks none of them are true. Josh agrees with perhaps the size, that it is massive. Beth, who I believe is in a classroom. Are you in a classroom, Beth, or are you on your own? Saying all are false. Adele says from the classroom, all false apart from the size. This is the fun part. I love doing this, working our way through the myths. None are true, although the size might be true, but not in comparison to the surface web. All right, let's have a look. So let me just flick back to my slides, and I'm going to go through each of these systematically. 1 second, everybody. There we go. So absolutely not. Downloading Tor is not illegal. Accessing the dark web is not illegal either. Though there was at one time a perception that yes, if you downloaded it, by accessing the Tor project, which is the website where you would download the file from, the governments, including GCHQ, the FBI, would be compiling a list of people. So compiling a list of people who were downloading Tor, which is completely unrealistic, but it serves law enforcement quite well for people to fear downloading Tor, because it's almost acts as a deterrent, doesn't it? You know, if you're afraid that the very act of downloading Tor will lead to you being surveyed, that is going to amplify or increase the chances that you won't download it or that you won't go there, which can be beneficial. It only contains illegal material. No, it doesn't. There have been studies on this that are absolutely fascinating, that actually finds that I think somewhere in the proportion of about 47% would be defined under UK law as clearly illegal. So in other words, hacking, crypto markets, child abuse imagery, etc., etc. But the actually over 50% of it is very ordinary and mundane. So that's actually growing in terms of its proportion. So what would some of that ordinary and mundane information be? A lot of it is file sharing, so videos, music, The dark web has its own varieties of social media, its own equivalent of things like Reddit, its own equivalent of news outlets as well. There's the dark web radio stations as well that exist there. If you're interested in dark web acid jazz, you can access that. There's some really weird stuff there. So there are people there who have uploaded pictures of what they think the blueprints or prototypes of alien spaceships would be, or conspiracy theories. But is that illegal? No, it's just fringe. It's unusual. It's niche. And a lot of it as well are political views and beliefs that people would not feel comfortable sharing on the surface web because their friends and family might think, you know, this isn't normal, that they would share on the dark web. So controversial views and beliefs. Is it illegal? No. Is it unusual? Maybe. Okay. So linked to that as well, do only criminals use it? No, absolutely not. And again, there's a growing proportion of ordinary people who are using it to circumvent and navigate around censorship or surveillance, having their data gathered. So definitely not the case that it's only cyber criminals that use it. A massive one is the belief that the dark web isn't policed, that because of the tools that I mentioned before, the police have a very difficult time surveying it or policing it, so therefore it's not worth the time investment. Let me put it this way. Let me give you an example of the physical world. If there was a hotspot within a town or a city that most of the county lines drug trafficking moved through, that would be probably the most surveyed and watched area and part of a city than any other area. You know, police forces would dedicate time and focus to watching what is going on there. Exactly the same thing happens with the dark web. We have this enclosed bubble where a lot of criminal activity goes on, and it is actually probably one of the most surveyed, policed, and web scraped areas of the internet. Far more than certain areas of the surface web, because it's a hotbed. So because of that, law enforcement, police forces work together on a transnational basis to investigate this and gather data. So it's not the wild, wild west. It's not the hidden cybercrime capital of the internet. It is actually harshly, strictly policed, and there are routine big market takedowns that happen on almost monthly basis, because of how much investment and energy is going into taking down some of these markets. If I use the dark web, will I get hacked? And this is where it's important for me to throw a little bit of a health warning into the mix. So while I'm talking to you about the positive beneficial uses of the dark web, does that mean that you should all flock to the dark web after this session and go and use it? No, it doesn't. It still means that you need to learn about safe ways to access a digital space that is attractive to cyber criminals, yes. And let me give you another example. So if you were using social media, you would not advertise details about your full name, bank account, address, birthday, and your daily activities of what you're doing and where you're going. Now, just like you wouldn't do that on the surface web, there are certain aspects or elements of digital hygiene and personal cyber safety that you need to adhere to when you use the dark web. So for any of you who are thinking, yes, I'd really like to study that, or I'd really like to go and see what's going on there, there are forums and there are guides on the surface web where you can read about the safe ways to use the dark web, ways to not leak and release personal data all over the place. So safety first, essentially. Protect yourself and learn how to use something properly before you venture there. Nonetheless, using the dark web, just, you know, going there for an afternoon, does not within itself mean that you're going to get hacked. No, it does not mean that. It does mean that if you are careless and if you post or use personal data and information in a way that's not conscientious and considered and careful. So that's something that I do with my students as well, is I talk them through safety associated with using this space, because that's important. Now, interestingly, the size. So everybody was saying before, oh, the size of the dark web is huge, isn't it? Actually, it is tiny. It is composed of probably no more than about somewhere between 40 to 65,000 websites. That's nothing. That is tiny. You know, that is, if I were to give you, you know, if I flick forward a slide, actually, because I've got one more slide. If I look at this last slide, the dark web's often represented like this within an iceberg. So if you look at the bottom section of this where it says the dark web, which is beneath something else called the deep web, you'll see that I've got there, and this is quite an old slide now, 30,000 sites was what it was a couple of years back. It's grown now to somewhere between 40 and 65, which in the grander scheme of things accounts for no more than about 1% of the overarching size of the internet, which is tiny, tiny, tiny. Okay, so very, very, very small. And finally, the dark web is really difficult to access. No, it'll take you 30 seconds to type in Tor project in your Google browser, go to Windows or the Mac download tab, and there you go. You've downloaded the Tor browser, you know, install it, and you're good to go. Ready for some digital dark web tourism. You know, it's very, very simple. You don't need to be a computer expert. You don't need to know how to code and program, etc. So very, very simple and straightforward. Now, just to, and I originally gave you an introduction as to the structure of the dark web, but just to give you one last nugget of information, you'll often hear the deep web be discussed as well. The deep web is separate to the dark web. So the deep web basically is all of the data and information that exists behind legal, not illegal, but legal websites that's mundane, ordinary, and, you know, think, for example, like personal data, web pages, banking information that's hidden behind password protected walls. It's part of the ordinary internet. You just can't access it because it's hidden behind passwords within the infrastructure of different websites. The dark web, as this slide indicates, is something separate. It's its own little bubble within itself. Okay, so that brings me to the end of my presentation. I'd hope to give you 10 minutes to ask me questions, but because of that little hiccup with the video, we've got 5 minutes. My apologies for that. But I hope you found that really interesting and engaging, and it helped to demystify some of the perceptions that you may have had around the dark web. If you have any questions, or if there's anything that you want to ask me, then feel free to type into the chat or to unmute. So both are absolutely fine. And I'll answer